and welcome to our retreat on Mother Worship. So last night we had our first session, and I spoke in general about Mother Worship. And so today I'm going to speak more specifically about some of the aspects of the Divine Mother. So let me, as always, begin with a chant, and I'll do the same that I began with yesterday, which again is from the Durga Suktam, the hymn to Durga from the Vedas. Kam agnivarnam tapasa jwalantim vairochanim karma phaleshu jushtam Durgan Devi Gum Sharanamaham Prapadye Sutarasi Tarase Namaha. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om. Salutation to that goddess who is the color of fire, aflame with ardency, bright as the sun and pleased with the fruits of action offered to her. We take refuge in the goddess Durga, who easily takes us across the ocean of samsara. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So, Mother Worship. So first I want to start in speaking about aspects of the Divine Mother with an image that is not Hindu, but which could easily have been Hindu, and perhaps the development would have been a little different, but certainly sympathetic with the development that has been there, and that is the mother of Jesus, Mary. So I start with that just because it's it's a good place to start. No other explanation is needed than that. So the ideal of Jesus is what we think of when we think of Christianity, but the ideal of Mary is a very beautiful part of that ideal, which again was not generally accepted in the Protestant denominations of Christianity, but very important in Roman Catholicism and in Eastern Orthodoxy. And so it really is a unique ideal because of the beauty of the way that Mary is presented as a figure of love and compassion, an image of acceptance, one who is surrendered to the will of God. When the angel of the Lord appeared to her and said that she was going to bear a child, then she said, let it be unto me as it has been commanded. She accepted the will of God and bore the child Jesus. There's not much about her in the Bible. She's only mentioned maybe 3 times in the Bible. And at the beginning in the Nativity, and then she's mentioned during the mission of Jesus, and then she's mentioned again at the crucifixion. And she's not always mentioned with great reverence and devotion, because during Christ's mission, he basically tells her to get away, that she is not, he has, you get the idea that he has no human family. He doesn't recognize human family because he's here for God's work. He's the child of God. But very soon after the crucifixion of Christ, in the early years of Christianity, she began to emerge as more and more an important figure. And so we don't know how that happened exactly. There are theories. Some say it's because the worship of the goddess in some form had been so prevalent that she came as a fill-in for something that people missed when they began to turn to Christianity. But it may be much more natural explanation. It may be that the record we have in the Gospels of Jesus and of Mary is very, very thin. The Gospels are very short. There are very few things told about Jesus and extremely little told about Mary. And it may be that the actual figure of Mary was much more a part of early Christianity than than the record shows us. And so it may be that there was more to the tradition around Mary from the beginning than we know. So it might not have just been people missing a goddess figure who used Mary to fill in an empty hole. That's a very reductionist view of how Mary came to be viewed the way she was later, with great devotion. But one of the things that you see in the development of the ideal of Mary was that she never became fully divine. She was the mother of Jesus and therefore accorded a special place. And it was believed that if Jesus was the Son of God, then certainly the mother who bore him must have been very special. And so that's where the idea of the Immaculate Conception comes from. Most people think the Immaculate Conception refers to Jesus, but no, actually the Immaculate Conception refers to Mary, that she was conceived at the time of her conception of Mary. She was conceived without sin. Again, part of the Christian view that from the time of the fall of Adam and Eve, everyone is conceived in sin. But Mary, in order to be the mother of the Christ child, had to have been conceived without sin. And so she was unique among creatures in that she was pure from her conception. And so whatever that is, and whatever the truth or non-historical truth of that, it doesn't matter. She was accorded a special place, but she was never regarded as divine. And yet you find that for some Christians, she in time became even more important than Jesus himself. One need only look nearby to Mexico, to Maria de Guadalupe, often just known as Guadalupe, the Virgin of Guadalupe, who became such an important spiritual force in Mexico and through Central America as well. So if Mary and the story of Jesus had come out of India or had been indigenous to India, then certainly Mary would have quickly become recognized as a deity, not just a human being worthy of special veneration. So that's the official view of the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, that she's not God, she's a creature like us, but she was especially worthy of veneration for having been the mother of Jesus. But you see the reality of the ideal of Mary and the fact that over 2 millennia, there are countless great saints and even ordinary people who were not saintly, who had the direct vision of Mary. So the truth of the Mary ideal, whatever the historical foundation, that doesn't matter. The truth of the ideal is seen by the fact that she has been experienced by countless saints and even ordinary people who are not saintly, in spiritual vision, in dream, etc. And so there's a controversy over Mary in the modern age. There are those who feel that her image as the Madonna who was submissive to God, to the patriarchal God, that was used to keep women under control, to keep women in their place. And there may be truth to that. I don't deny that. And there may be that might have been a factor in the subordination of women to men historically. But that doesn't affect the beauty of the image. It's one thing that something can be used for bad purposes, but that shouldn't affect our view of the thing itself. The ideal of Mary is extraordinarily beautiful because of her complete openness to the activity of God, because that's what we need. That's what the soul needs. We come into this world full of faith. faith in everything, faith in parents, faith in society, faith in people, faith in the world itself. And gradually, as we go through childhood into youth and then adulthood, we learn at every step that we can't trust everything. So when we come to spiritual life, we find that it's hard to open our hearts in faith to God and to the spiritual truth. We've learned our lesson too well that you can't trust everyone. And so in spiritual life, one of the things we have to learn is what to open ourselves to fully and what to protect ourselves from. A large part of spirituality, spiritual life, is learning that, especially initial spiritual life. And so in spiritual life, we have to learn to open ourselves fully to God. That's part of what surrender is. And Mary is the symbol of that, the soul completely surrendered to God. And because she is the very embodiment of that attitude, and because she was presented as the embodiment of that attitude, then certainly in India, if, again, the Christian message had been come out of India or come within India, she would quickly have been recognized as a divine ideal, not just as a human being, as a special creature. Because in India, it was recognized from ancient times that the divine is in everything, and anything that is sublime, spiritually sublime, can serve as a symbol of God. Anything can be a symbol of God because the divine is already present in everything. And someone like Mary certainly would have attained to divine status and been a goddess in time. And so in Christianity, the theologians made a sharp distinction between Mary, worship or adoration of Mary, and worship of God, including the worship of Jesus. And they used a different term for the adoration of Mary to show that veneration or adoration of her was special among all creatures. She deserved adoration in a way that no other creature did, but it was not the same as worship of God. Again, because of the necessity that they felt of preserving monotheism, that God is one. And already Christianity was criticized by other monotheistic religions for having the idea of the Trinity. And so they couldn't stretch it beyond the Trinity. But it could easily have been done so, were it not for that historical stricture that was put on ideas. So again, she was, there are two objections to the worship of, or even the adoration of Mary in the modern world. One is that there's not a historical basis. Or that, as I said, we don't know of a historical basis, because if we just have the text of the Bible, there's not much there about Mary. But there may have been more to the oral tradition, which was passed through the early centuries of Christianity, than we know. But even that doesn't matter, because again, the idea in Hinduism is that God likes to sport in certain forms. And so it doesn't matter whether Ganesha is a historical figure. Probably Ganesha is not a historical figure, but God likes to sport in the form of Ganesha. Krishna probably was historical, but not all of the stories of Krishna. His life was highly mythologized, but probably there was a historical core. But even if historians were to prove that Krishna never historically existed, still we know that Krishna is God because of the direct experience of saints and sages for thousands of years, where it was through Krishna, through the personhood, the divine personhood of Krishna, that countless people have attained to blessedness. I even know of a number of Muslims in India who had the experience of Krishna and recognized it as a divine experience. One of my friends, his sister, had the vision of Krishna, of a Muslim friend, my friend became a Swami of our order, Hindu Swami, but he was from a Muslim family. And his sister, who remained Muslim, but she took initiation and she had the vision of Krishna. And I know of a great musician, a flautist, Bansi, the Indian flute player, who used to play in the Krishna temple in Benares. And there, when he knew that he was playing properly when he had the vision of Krishna. And so whether Krishna was historical or not, it doesn't matter. Whether there was a historical Rama or not, doesn't matter. God likes to play in the form of Krishna, likes to play in the form of Rama, likes to play in the form of Ganesha, likes to play in the form of Shiva. So all of these ideals of God are real. And no less was the ideal of Mary, a beautiful ideal of one who is so empty of self that becomes filled with God. Some of the hymns to Mary in the Christian tradition are extraordinarily beautiful. And you can see that there was always this tension bordering right on worship of Mary as the divine being itself, and just being held back by theology. So anyway, that's just more of a historical note, just as sort of a comparison that, again, as I said yesterday, that the ideal of the motherhood of God has been found all around the world at different times. And at some times it was restricted, not allowed to fully develop. At other times it was the main idea of God, the motherhood of God. So now let's come back to the Hindu tradition and focus on that. And so we find that one of the early ideas of the Divine Mother in Vedic times, in fact, she disappeared after Vedic times. Even by late Vedic times, you find that she had practically disappeared. That is the goddess Aditi, Aditi, A-D-I-T-I. She was prominent early in the Vedas, but later disappeared. But of course, because the Vedas never disappeared, she never completely disappeared. But what I mean by disappeared is that she disappeared as a goddess who was actively worshipped. So she became more of a memory in later Hinduism and even in the late Vedic period. But Aditi is very interesting because she is the embodiment of the ideal of infinity. Many of the Vedic gods and later classical gods, there are many stories told about them and so forth. They're with a fully developed personality. But Aditi was the very emblem of the infinite, that which was beyond description. Aditi was the mother of all of the gods. Those of you who are familiar with the Hindu pantheon will know Aditya. Aditya, one of the names for sun, and Aditya, the sun god. So Aditya means the son of Aditi, but Aditi was the mother of all of the gods. She was that out of which all of the gods came, the very ideal of the unlimited. The name Aditi comes from Adi, meaning the negation, and D, one of the meanings of D is to measure. To measure, and to measure is to limit, to describe the limits of something. And so she who has no limits, she whose limits cannot be described. And so she was, again, the deity of the infinite. Sri Aurobindo derives her name, Aditi, from ad, which means to eat, and iti means all of this. So she who contains all of this, she who contains the universe. So again, she was the infinite, the unlimited. And even Western scholars, many of whom are slow to recognize early ideas, early advanced ideas in Hinduism. Even Western scholars have readily admitted that Aditi is the earliest manifestation of the idea of the infinite, the unlimited. And she was a goddess, the goddess who was the unlimited, who was the mother of everything, the reality out of which the deities came. And as I said yesterday, I'll just mention it now in passing, but as I said yesterday, there is the Devi Suktam, which comes in the Vedas, the hymn written by the sage, the woman Rishi, Vak, the goddess named after the goddess of speech. And so that was the first expression of the non-dual experience, where a sage first expressed complete identity with reality itself, and saw herself manifested in everything. And so that also gave impetus to the idea of the goddess as the mother of everything, the mother as reality itself. So there was Aditi, who was the unlimited, the infinite, without much description of personality, because how could she be limited by personality? The mother of everything, the mother of all of the gods. And then there was the Devi Suktam, the experience of a woman sage of her identity with everything, but because of her being a woman and her hymn being called the Devi Suktam, the Suktam of the goddess of Devi, that also had a profound influence on the development of the idea of the motherhood of God. And so then we come to Saraswati. Saraswati is one of the most ancient goddesses in the Vedas. And originally, Saraswati was a river goddess, the river Saraswati. As some or maybe all of you know, the Saraswati River figured very prominently in the early part of the Vedas. And the Saraswati River was supposed to be the river in which Vedic civilization, along which Vedic civilization developed. And modern scholars had thought for a long time that it was a mythological river, or they thought, well, maybe it meant the ocean because it was described as being vast, or they thought that it maybe was just a mythological river, or maybe it was a metaphorical river, just a poetic image or something, but without any reality, because there was no evidence of the river described in the Vedas. But again, as some of you at least will know, with the help of NASA satellite photographs of the Earth and that part of India and Pakistan, it was found the ancient riverbed of the Saraswati has been found. So now they know that there was the river Saraswati, which, because of geological activity, maybe the shifting of the tectonic plates, because that area is very geologically active, the river eventually dried up. And so the Saraswati, even in Vedic times, the Saraswati disappeared. So the ancient explanation was that the Saraswati went underground. And so some of you know that in Prayag, Allahabad or Prayag, that the Triveni, the three rivers are said to meet. There's the Ganga, the Yamuna rivers, which you can see, and it's believed that underground the Saraswati River joins those two rivers. Well, no, there's no geological evidence for that, but it was a sacred imagination, perhaps. But the memory of the Saraswati River remained. And so originally, Saraswati was a goddess associated with the river named Saraswati. As we have the goddess Ganga, who's worshipped in Gangotri and other places, but the Ganga was personified into a goddess. And the Yamuna also, the goddess Yamuna. And so in puja, we invoke the presence of the sacred rivers, the goddesses of the sacred rivers. We use the Ankusha Mudra, the elephant goad mudra, which is like this, with one finger bent, like an elephant goad. If you've ever seen an elephant goad, even in zoos in America, the elephant keepers use and they call it the ankush, from the Sanskrit word ankush. And it's just like this. It's a metal with a 1-inch extension. And this part was to keep it from poking too far into the elephant's flesh. But the elephant's skin is so thick that you have to poke in an inch for the elephant to feel it. And so the ankush was used to goad the elephant. And an elephant keeper in San Diego explained to me, he was the one who told me that, oh yeah, we call this the ankush. And I immediately recognized it as the ankusha. And he said, people complain that we're being cruel to the elephants, poking them with this, but unless we poke them with this, we don't even get their attention. So we use that in the puja. We put our finger into the water like that and say, Om Gange Yamune Chaiva Godavari Saraswati Narmade Sindhu Kaveri Jalesmin Sannidhim Kuru. So we address the 7 sacred rivers, the traditional sacred rivers, including Saraswati, and invoke their presence within the water. And so as one does that, one thinks that these celestial goddesses who represent the consciousness behind the rivers are called into the water. In fact, it's said that those who have the eyes to see, those who have the awakened eyes to see, they see the Ganga not just as a physical river, but they see it as a flow of spiritual consciousness. That the water itself they see as a stream of spiritual consciousness, and we know people like the Holy Mother Sarada Devi. She had a profound reverence for the Ganga, and so not just oh, it's a pretty river, but a profound reverence for its spiritual significance. And so Saraswati, again back to Saraswati, she started as a river goddess, but it was recognized in time the great importance of her as a river and as a river goddess, because the Vedic civilization grew up along the banks of the Saraswati River. And so in time, that connection between Saraswati and the river was never lost, even though the river itself disappeared. And in later times, Indian civilization moved to the banks of the Ganges, and then further south to the other sacred rivers of India, all the way to the southern tip of India. But the connection between Saraswati and the river never ceased, so that even now when you see an image of Saraswati, you see in the background, there's a river that she's seated beside. So the historical connection between her and the river was not lost. And because it was the source of the foundation of civilization in India, she became the goddess of culture, because it was along her banks that culture developed. She's the goddess of learning, she's the goddess of culture, she's the goddess of the arts, because all of that developed along her banks. And she was the one who provided civilization. And as we see around the world, civilization started on the banks of rivers, whether it was the Tigris Euphrates in the Middle East, or the Yellow River in China, or wherever. It was along the banks of rivers that culture began, civilization began. And so she remained the goddess of learning, the goddess of civilization, the goddess of culture, the goddess of wisdom, the goddess of language, etc. Again, the connection between the river and the goddess. Now, when it's explained that way, as I've just explained it, that there was the river, culture grew up along it, the river was revered because it was what made civilization possible, the development of civilization possible, then it sounds like Saraswati was a made-up goddess, that she started as a river, then she became a sacred river because people personified her, thought of her as a person, and then that person became a bigger and bigger goddess, so that she became so big that even when the river disappeared, she remained as a goddess. So it's all a very reductionist way of looking at Saraswati. But no, I don't intend it that way. What I said about her development is certainly true. That's the historical part. But as I said, the Vedic and the Hindu view is that God likes to play in certain forms, the infinite in contact with the relative, the infinite when manifesting as the relative, manifests in a variety of ways. And so the development of Saraswati from a river to a goddess, to the goddess of learning and culture and wisdom, that was a gradual development, yes, from the human side, but from the divine side, it was the gradual recognition of the goddess of wisdom. Our contact with divine wisdom, divine culture, divine learning, divine language, that had a historical path of development. But there was the other side of it, the divine side of it, where the divine manifested as Saraswati. So again, it shouldn't be taken as purely a human historical phenomenon that we made up this goddess and made her bigger and bigger, and then she became so big that we kept her for the rest of human history. No, that's only the human side of things. It's important to know that, because then we know the image, or then Saraswati, her image, her reality becomes more complete to us when we know the historical roots of her development. But again, that development was not limited to the human side. There was the divine side as well. So then we come to Lakshmi, the goddess of prosperity, the goddess of good fortune. And those of you who are Bengali, or if you know any Bengali, you know that in Bengali, Lakshmi is pronounced Lokhi, Lokhi. The SH and the M disappear, and it becomes Lakshmi becomes Lokhi. And so Sister Nivedita, when she met Sri Ramakrishna's niece, Lakshmi Didi, and she was called Lokhi Didi. Then after that, whenever she would write about her in India, she would always give her the name Sister Lucky, L-U-C-K-Y. And so that's a very nice connection that she drew between the name Lokhi, who is the god of good fortune, and the English word lucky. So Lokhi Didi became Sister Lucky. So Lakshmi is the goddess of beauty, the goddess of grace, the goddess of prosperity. I have to admit that when I first came to Hinduism, Lakshmi was not one of the deities that attracted me, because my attraction to Hinduism was the ideal of renunciation. I came in because I wanted to be a sannyasi eventually, wanted to be a monk. And so Shiva, Kali, Durga, these images of renunciation were what I liked. I didn't even care much for Vishnu. I wanted these figures who wandered in cremation grounds and spent their time in samadhi and so forth, because that's what I was looking for. But later I came to realize that no, the image of Lakshmi is a wonderful and beautiful image, that society needs these positive images. Most people want all four values of human life that the Hindu scriptures have described, which I'll tell in a moment. And most people want the first three of them the most. And the fourth is sort of something that will come sometime in a future life. And that is dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Most people want dharma, that is righteousness, and possession, artha, wealth, and legitimate sense desire, sense satisfaction, sense pleasures. And the last is moksha. So in the Hindu scheme of things, moksha is the final goal for everyone. We'll find no final rest until we realize enlightenment and attain to full moksha. But most people are looking for righteousness, possession, and sense pleasure. Why does righteousness come in there? Do people actually want righteousness? It seems like many people, if righteousness were not there to control them, they would be much happier just to grab whatever they want as quickly as they want, without fear of the policeman. As Swami Vivekananda said, if it weren't for the presence of police, then society would fall into chaos, because the tendencies of most people is to grab what they can. So he said that the controlling factor of the police is unfortunately necessary to keep society under control. But no, everybody has as an ideal righteousness, even the criminal. That's why the criminal goes to great lengths to justify why they did what they did. That person deserved to be killed. I needed to kill them. So everybody wants to justify, I robbed that bank because they robbed from everybody else, so why shouldn't I rob from them? So that very tendency we have to explain away our bad actions and justify them shows that we all want to be thought of as righteous, as good. The term righteous in modern English after the 60s in particular has taken on a rather unfortunate connotation. It sounds like self-righteous. But everybody wants to be thought of as good and doing things for the right reason. So righteous in that sense. And so it's said that we can seek prosperity, we can seek sense pleasures. If we do it in a righteous way, it won't hurt us. Eventually, we will come to the point where renunciation comes to us naturally. And so most people in life, including most religious people, they want to possess, they want to be prosperous in some sense. They want to have ordinary pleasures of life. And so the Hindu scriptures say, as long as you do that while observing dharma, while being a good person, doing it in a legitimate way, then it won't harm you. Swami Satprakashananda, who founded the St. Louis Center, people would come to him sometimes and say, Maharaj, what happens after Nirvikalpa Samadhi? And so he would chuckle and say, you don't need to worry about what comes after Nirvikalpa Samadhi. There are many other things to be concerned with first. He would say that just try to be a good person, be a good spouse, be a good parent, be a good son or daughter, be a good worker, be a good citizen. And just by trying to be a good person, gradually you'll find that there's not that much to be had in life. And so, yes, that's very true. If we just try to be a good person, gradually we find that there's not that much to be had in life. Why do we think that there's all of this intense enjoyment out there waiting for me and I just got to get my hands on it? It's because of the restlessness of the mind. If we become good, if we become moral, we gradually get a sense of inner self-control, and we realize that that is superior to excess in all of its forms. And then we begin to avoid excess. And as we do that, the mind becomes calmer, and then we begin to see, actually see. It's not self-hypnotism, it's the opposite of that. We begin to see that we were deluded all of the time, thinking that there was all of this pleasure out there waiting for me. We begin to see that no, life isn't like that. For every pleasure I grab, I have to suffer equally. And so then gradually we begin to let go of it. That was the whole idea in Hinduism of pravritti and nivritti, the path of engagement with the world and gradual path of renunciation of the world. And so the goddess Lakshmi presents an image of good fortune, of prosperity, of beauty, etc., but in a spiritual context. And so the image of Lakshmi becomes a very powerful image if we understand it that way. We see that Sri Ramakrishna, in the lives of Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother, Sri Ramakrishna couldn't touch money, but what did the Holy Mother do? She would take money and touch it to her head as a symbol of Lakshmi. She was equally detached as Sri Ramakrishna. She kept money in a box and she never counted it. She didn't care how much was in there. If the box was full or the box was empty, meant nothing to her. But she always saluted any money that came in because she recognized that in that the image of Lakshmi. And so again, that was a different way of interacting with the idea of money from Sri Ramakrishna, who couldn't even touch it. But it was also a beautiful way of interacting. So Lakshmi is a positive and beautiful ideal, not just the object of worship, favorite object of worship of business people who are trying to get the money. No, it gives us a positive ideal towards which to work. An ideal of beauty and grace and prosperity. Not greed, but just having that which I need in life. That Lakshmi provides that which I need. She is the provider. There's an interesting tradition, which some of you from India will know, that on Lakshmi Puja, you don't, like in our monasteries, we have bells that are given, like in Christian monasteries and Hindu monasteries too, we give a bell at the time of meals. And so my first year in training center, when I had been to India once in 1971 for initiation, And then I went back in 75 to stay. I ended up staying at that time for 7 years. But I went back first to attend training center. And so in training center, we'd been through Durga Puja, and then came Lakshmi Puja. And I knew that Lakshmi Puja was happening, but again, as I explained, in those days I was not very fond of Lakshmi. The ideal didn't attract me. And so when Lakshmi Puja came, I didn't go to the temple. I stayed in my room at training center and was studying Sanskrit, which at the time seemed more important to me. And no one told me that on Lakshmi Puja, no bell is rung. Even in the puja, you don't ring a bell in Lakshmi Puja. Why? Because Lakshmi is easily scared away. And so you don't make loud noises or it will scare her away. That's an interesting idea, that prosperity is easily scared away. So be careful not to scare Lakshmi away by ringing bells or making loud noises. So I didn't realize that. So I was waiting for the puja to be over and for the bell to ring for supper. And it got long past the time for supper. And still there was no bell. And I thought, well, because the puja is going on, everything has gotten late. Finally, everybody returned to the training center from supper, having finished the puja and eaten supper too. And then they said, where were you? I said, I was waiting for the bell. No, there's no bell on Lakshmi Puja. So that was my introduction to the idea. And then when I was at Mayavati, where there's no deity worship or anything, but one of the Swamis, when anyone would accidentally hit two brass vessels on the eating table together, and one of them would start ringing, as brass does, then you say, Doro, 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 and you hold it, make it stop ringing. Again, because of that idea, it's going to drive Lakshmi away. So anyway, Lakshmi is a beautiful ideal. And then we come to Durga, whose worship we recently had in Navaratri. The etymology of Durga is Durgam, that which is difficult to, Durgam means difficult to go, literally. And so Durga, masculine, is a Sanskrit word meaning fort, that which is difficult to access, that which is difficult to overcome, difficult to go to, difficult to access, Durga. And so Durga, the goddess, is she who is invincible. The goddess Durga is she who is invincible. And then later there was another etymological derivation of her name, that Durgati Nashini. Durga means Durgati Nashini, she who destroys, Nashini, the destroyer of Durgati, of difficulties, of misfortunes and difficulties. So she who is the destroyer of misfortune and difficulties. With Durga, we find Vedic evidence of the goddess Durga. In the Indus Valley excavations, archaeologists have found seals. As you know, in the Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, there are various seals of the people of that time that have been found. And there's a seal that looks like the image of Durga. So she may be very ancient indeed. And then there's the Durga Suktam, which I chanted from in the beginning, a short part of it, hymn to Durga, where, let's see, again, let me look at the translation of that. Salutation to that goddess who is the color of fire. And so Durga is golden in color because she's the color of fire. You see again and again in deities that developed more in classical Hinduism, but had their roots in Vedic times, you see connection to fire. Like even Shiva, with covering himself with the ash of fire, and then his blue throat, which is said to be from the blue throat of a flame of fire, the Vedic fire, which was the main means of making offerings. And so the Nilakanta, the blue throat of Shiva, is said to have been an association with the blue throat of a flame of fire. And then the ash, and even the Shiva Lingam, as Swami Vivekananda explained, that the origin of the Shiva Lingam is the Upastambha, the post which the bull was, that was to be sacrificed in the Vedic sacrifice. The bull was tied to a post. And so the post became the image of Shiva, and the bull became the associate of Shiva. And so you see in the various deities that can be traced back to Vedic times, there's this association of fire. So Durga is the golden color. It says, who is the color of fire? A flame with ardency, with sincerity, with intensity. A flame with the fire of intensity. So again, Durga also was associated with the Vedic fire. And then you find that in the Kena Upanishad, well, a short Upanishad, but a very beautiful Upanishad, in the 3rd and 4th chapter, you find that Brahman appeared before the deities, Indra, Vayu, etc. And they couldn't figure out who this deity was. And so they approached it and tried to figure out who it was, but they couldn't figure it out. And then suddenly this appearance, which they couldn't understand what it was, it disappeared, and in its place came Uma Haimavati. It's the first mention of Uma Haimavati, Uma who comes from the Himalayas. And so you see that the later Uma, Parvati, Durga, Kali, all of them are associated with the Himalayas. And so Uma Haimavati appeared and explained to them that which you saw is Brahman. And then there's more teaching about that as the Upanishad concludes. So again, Uma Haimavati, her association with Durga, an aspect of Uma. So you see all of these associations coming out of the Vedas themselves, and then being developed more and more in classical Hinduism. So again, that's the tracing the historical path of the human side of their development. But there's not just the human side, as with Saraswati. There's the divine side, the divine mother manifesting. And in the Mahabharata, Yudhishthira and Arjuna invoke hymns to Durga. So the Mahabharata, though it was written later, but the Mahabharata, the stories and the traditions of the Mahabharata tell of the late Vedic age. So again, by the late Vedic age, already Durga was a goddess who was being prayed to. Arjuna and Yudhishthira invoke her. And in the Puranas, the Markandeya Purana, one of the oldest of the Puranas, which is like a supplement to the Mahabharata. There it has it's a non-sectarian Purana. Some of the Puranas were Vaishnava, some were Shaiva, some were Shakta. But the Markandeya Purana is non-sectarian. And there you find the Chandi, the first full text devoted to Durga. The Chandi, which even now is chanted by many. Some of you knew Swami Tathagatanandaji in New York. He used to chant the Chandi every morning. And there are other Swamis also. Swami Vita Mohanandaji, who was in Gretz and died just a year or two ago. I think just a year ago. He also used to chant the Chandi every day. And Swami Swahananda, when he sent me to Ridgely Manor to start the retreat there, to acquire the property and begin it as a retreat, he told me that it's going to be a very difficult work, so you should chant from the Chandi every day. Because the Chandi, the story of Ma Durga, and her defeat of the demons. Now, a person who has no background, who reads the Chandi, it's a very strange scripture because it tells about the goddess cutting off the heads of demons and drinking the blood of demons and all of this battle and gore and everything. But as Swami Vivekananda said, the way to read a mythic story is to read it and let the effect settle over you, not to try to analyze it. Well, this means this and that means that, and they did this because of this, that, and the other. No, to read it and let the effect of the story. And so that's what happens if you read the Chandi. You find that it calls up heroic energy within you. Swami Swahananda also used to say that people who are shocked when they first come across Durga and Kali, killing demons and slaughtering and drinking blood and all of that. But he would ask, he would use these terms. He would say, I asked them, what kind of mother do you want? Do you want a namby-pamby mother? Or do you want a real mother who will protect you? And so, yes, Durga is that. She's the mother, the all-loving mother, but the one who can destroy all obstacles. And so in reading the Chandi, you get that sense of the Divine Mother as Shakti, as power. The feeling that every small child has about its own mother. Every small child feels that its own mother could do anything, could conquer anything. And so that is the Divine Mother who can do everything. So in meaning of her image, she has 10 arms, showing that she's active in all 10 directions. The 8 points of the compass and enter points, and then the zenith and the native. So in the 10 directions, she's active with 10 arms. Once Holy Mother said sort of to herself, but someone was in the courtyard in Jairambati and heard her. She said, even with so many arms, I find it difficult to finish the work. And then she stopped, realizing someone was hearing her, and she put her hands on her thighs and looked up and said, you see the fun? Here I have 2 hands, and I say, even with all of these hands, I find it difficult to finish my work. And so, of course, for Holy Mother, it didn't mean that she was carrying 10 arms around, but it meant that she was identified with the whole universe. All arms were her arms. All feet were her feet. All eyes were her eyes. So Durga represents that. She's golden in color because she's the color of fire, the color of ardency, the color of energy. She's riding on a lion, and the lion represents the jiva. If we devote ourselves to Durga, then we will be like an all-conquering lion. Mother will ride on our back, and so the lion is us. And so the image of Durga is a very beautiful image. And then we come to Kali, and I'll conclude with Kali. The meaning of the image of Kali. She's one that, of course, again, to people who are unfamiliar with Kali, she's much more frightful than Durga. At least Durga is killing demons. But Kali is holding in one hand a severed head, in another hand on the left side, the sword with which she severed the head. And on the right side, her 2 arms, because she has 4, she's giving Abhaya Mudra, fearlessness, and Varadana Mudra, granting of boons. And so the image of Kali, as Sister Nivedita said, Kali is everything that an Indian woman was not supposed to be. So she is the image of contradiction. But that is the power of Kali. First of all, she's stepping on the chest of her husband. And when she realizes that she stepped on her husband, then she sticks her tongue out in a gesture of modesty, like that, as you see even now in India, people do when they realize they've done something wrong. Go like so. And so Ma Kali is doing that in a gesture of modesty. And also some say, with legitimate reason, that she also sticking out her tongue to drink the blood of demons. Well, what do the head and the sword represent that she has in her left hand? The head and the sword are not just the head of demons. That's what cowards say, that, oh, she's cutting off the heads of demons to protect us. No, that's my head. That's your head. That's our head that she's cutting off with the sword of knowledge. But is Mother then cruel? No, she's giving the sign of fearlessness. Don't be afraid. And the sign of giving boons. I give you that which is whatever is needed, and I assure you of freedom from fear, and I chop off your head. So she's the giver of life, and she's giver of death. Now, I've explained that to people thus far sometimes, to Westerners, and they say, oh, I get it. She's the chastising mother. No, not at all. She's the all-loving mother, the all-loving, tender-hearted mother. If we can see in the midst of experience, everything that comes to us, the all-loving hand of the mother, that she is bringing the experiences, good and bad, pleasurable and painful, everything that comes to us, everything that happens, success and failure, wonderful things and complete tragedy. All of that is coming from the all-loving hand of the mother. It's a gift of the mother. And then we can transcend the dualities of life. Once we can see the all-loving hand of the mother behind everything that happens, good and bad, then we're ready to go straight to the mother. And we recognize the all-loving face of the mother. So Kali is the all-loving mother, not the demoness, not the punishing mother, not a chastising mother, not good and bad. No, she's the all-loving mother who's behind, higher than, transcends both good and bad, pleasure and pain. She's naked, like the naked truth. Nothing in Kali is hidden. She's naked like the naked truth. Her hair is loose, flowing, whereas a married Indian woman traditionally would have braided hair, but her hair was flowing like the flow of time. And so the many other aspects of her image, all of them deeply symbolic. And so in the beginning, when we approach Kali, then the symbolism is helpful. Then it gives us, we look at the image of Kali and we see deep meaning. But in time, the symbolism fades away as symbolism, and just the mother remains. The mother alone remains. She who is the mother of existence. She who is the mother of my own being. She who is my own being. More than the mother of my being. She is my being itself. My experience, good and bad, is the experience of Kali. Again, referring, as I did last night, to that statement in the gospel where Sri Ramakrishna says says that everything here is the play of the Divine Mother. And the devotee says, sir, it may be mother's play, but it's our torment. And Sri Ramakrishna asks, yes, but who are you? Meaning my experience is the experience of Mother Kali. As Sister Nivedita expressed it, Kali is the vision of Shiva. Shiva is pure consciousness, and we as the Atman are pure consciousness. But Shiva, looking up, sees the vision of Kali. Shiva is absorbed in the self, absorbed in the infinite Brahman, which Shiva is. And then Kali steps on his chest and wakes him up from his samadhi. And he looks up and sees Kali. That is this. All of this that we see is Kali. We are the Atman. We are pure consciousness. And yet what we see is what Shiva sees. Looking up, mother stepping on his chest, bringing him out of samadhi, and he looks up and sees Kali. We are the same. That's an image of us. Mother Kali has stepped on our chest. We, the Atman. We open our eyes and see this. But the difference is that Shiva recognizes it as Kali. And so he remains in ecstasy, but a different type of ecstasy, where he sees that this also is that pure universe of pure consciousness manifested in a world of dualities. But we forget that. We forget that we are the self, and that all of this is the play of the Divine Mother dancing on our chest. And so again, if we can see that, then we have done what we were, our whole long process of birth and rebirth was aiming for. We've come to the end of the path through the realm of samsara and come back to our home in liberation. And so Kali, the mother, represents all of that. She's perhaps the most profound symbol, religious symbol in the whole world. I don't know of any symbol anywhere in the world that captures as much as Mother Kali does. So that which is terrifying to the uninitiated is the object of love of the initiated. Those who understand Kali see that she is the most beneficent, the most lovely. And if a person has the vision of Kali, and I'll say this because especially to Westerners, and I grew up in the West, so it applies to me as well. When we first see something like the image of Dakshineshwar Kali, it looks strange to non-Indian eyes. In Indian eyes, because it's part of the culture. You grow up with that and it looks beautiful. But to someone else, it looks like a strange representation. Not because of the head and things, but even the way the face is figured and the eyes and everything. We don't understand the symbolism and all of that. So we don't know how to read the image. And so it looks strange. But if one has the vision of the actual Kali, then it's the most beautiful vision one can imagine. She appears as the most beautiful thing in the world. And that's why the poets have described Kali with a great emphasis on the extraordinary beauty, where every fingernail, every toenail is radiating light. And her blackness is the blackness of beauty. So Kali is love itself. Kali is the mother herself. And it's through the experiences of life, that she's leading us back to our memory that we are the divine self. We are Shiva, Shivoham. We are Shiva. But also the worshiper of Mother learns to say, Saham, I am she. You know, Soham, I am he. I am he, I am Brahman, I am Shiva, Shivoham, Soham. But also the Shakta comes to say, Saham, I am she. This is Mother Kali. One begins to lose the personal dimensions of self. We begin to feel like an impersonal being. Then we no longer feel that I'm little Swami Atmarupananda among other little people doing little things and insignificant things. But one begins to see life in terms of principle. One begins to see life in terms of consciousness, existence, and the working of principles. And then one begins to see that, yes, everything is Mother. Everything is Mother. Everything is Brahman. Everything is Mother. They come to the same thing. So with that, time is up, and more